Good afternoon. My name is Ioana Cismas. I'm a professor at the York Law School and the Center for Applied Human Rights. And I have the pleasure to welcome you today to Gaming for Humanitarianism. Um, my three colleagues, Rebecca, Mark, and Daisy, will provide insights about why and how they have developed the Beyond game, which is part of the Beyond Compliance Consortium, a co-productive partnership that seeks to address everyday lived experiences of armed conflict. I have the pleasure to introduce you to the three speakers. Rebecca Sutton is a co-investigator for the Beyond Compliance Consortium and a professor of international law at the University of Glasgow. She's an international lawyer and academic with a practitioner background in youth peace building, human rights, and humanitarian aid. Marc Linning is the director of the Protection of Civilians Division at the Center for Civilians in Conflict, or for short, CIVIC. His expertise includes the operationalization of civilian harm mitigation efforts by armed actors, as well as support and engagement with conflict-affected communities, assisting them to better self-protect. Daisy Abbott is a reader in game-based learning at the Glasgow School of Art. She's an interdisciplinary researcher and research developer. She specializes in game-based learning, serious games, 3D visualizations, and issues surrounding digital interactions in the arts and humanities. I have the pleasure to give the screen to Rebecca.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I'm just sharing my slides here. I'll just put it in a full view so everyone can see. I'm delighted to be with you. It's my first time at the York Festival of Ideas. So it's great to engage with this audience, and we're going to leave extended time for Q&As at the end. So I hope that I see a couple people joining us. I know we're working in the field of peace gaming and humanitarian games. So we'd love to have like a lively chat with you after. And we'll be inviting you during the Q&A part to put your questions in the Q&A spot, and I can help connect you with the right speaker. Okay, so what I thought we'd do to kick off is I'm going to give a little bit of big picture framing to give a sense to people who might not be familiar with our consortium about how this Beyond game came to exist and how it emerges naturally from our research. And then I'll pass over to Daisy, who's going to be focusing on serious games, gaming, and game design. And Daisy will share a little bit about the behind the scenes co-design process that led to the game. And then we'll hear from Mark, who will be talking about the game itself. And we don't have a full demo for you today. It's not fully polished and ready. But what we thought we'd do is give you a look behind the scenes as the game is being made, to show you a little clip, a teaser, and to give you a sense of the mechanics and how we're thinking about it. And then we'll go to our Q&A after that. So just very briefly, let me tell you a little bit about the Beyond Compliance Consortium. So if you look at the logos on the side, you can see that we have a mix of universities and humanitarian and practitioner organizations. And we've come together with funding from UK International Development. So it's the FCDO, or the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, that's funding us for 3 years with around £5 million. And we're working across 9 countries. So we have Afghanistan, Colombia, DRC, Myanmar, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, and Yemen. And our research from all of these settings has informed the game, which does not focus on a particular context. And part of what we're trying to do, aside from connecting academics with practitioners and policymakers, we're trying to cut across the fields of law and political science and humanitarian protection work. Basically, everybody who's interested in what happens to communities in war and in trying to improve lives for people who are caught up in conflict, and also people who fight in those conflicts and their decision-making processes. So the big kind of catchwords that we work with are compliance and restraint. So we're interested in figuring out strategies that will promote compliance with international law and restraint, for example, from violence. And also when we think of protection, we're thinking about not only civilian communities, but also people who are fighting in conflicts and might be especially vulnerable, like child soldiers. And that's relevant for our game today. And what we're building is a really solid empirical evidence based. And this comes from, but also informs our theoretical framework, which we advance in more scholarly articles, for example, about how war causes harm and need in communities and how these things can be prevented, reduced, regulated, responded to. And that generates our outputs. And one of our research outputs is the game that we're talking about today. So what I'll do is I'll just tell you a little bit about, let me just check this slide here. Oh, sorry, it's just stuck. Let me use, there we go. So one thing I want to set out for people who might not be familiar, and if you're not an international lawyer, usually international lawyers would start from, say, international humanitarian law, and they would look at an armed conflict and say, are the parties complying with this set of rules? And we know, even just looking at the newspaper headlines today, this is a huge topic of conversation. But our consortium wanted to do things a little bit differently. So we start with experiences of war in the everyday. We look at how do people experience harm, what kinds of needs are generated through armed conflict. Then we bring in the law. So we say, if that's the harm and that's the need, what does international law see? What's invisible to law? And where could law be a powerful tool? And where does it have value? And we really need to engender compliance with it. Or where is law limited? Maybe there are some things like displacement or mental health where law doesn't have enough to say about it, and we need non-legal or extra-legal strategies as well. But we're very much not saying let's be without law. We're saying law plus law and what else? And then we say what kind of strategies could prevent, reduce, and respond to the harm and need that we're finding. Those might involve law or not. And we take a relational approach, looking at a lot of different actors. And that's really important for this game, Beyond, because it's trying to show in a gamified form some of these experiences of war, where law comes in, and what the different actors are doing. And so the purpose of the game is to let a wide range of civilian protection actors, and there we mean affected communities, civilians, and also professional humanitarians and civilian protection actors. We want them to have the info, the knowledge, and the skills they need so they can advocate to states and weapons bearers to prevent, mitigate, respond to harm and need, including through compliance and restraint. And we focus on children in urban warfare. And this word UIPA is about explosive weapons in populated areas. So the game takes an interest in this particular problem, which law has some rules in relation to. And I won't go into detail here on the learning outcomes, but just to let you know, they span law, gender, emotions, and also advocacy techniques and negotiation skills. And finally, before I pass to Daisy, just to give you a sense of the why. So before we get into the game, you could say, well, why make a game? Why didn't you do a kind of scholarly output or a policy brief? And the short answer is we do all of those things, but we also wanted people to have a chance to embody some of the learning, to immerse in some narratives and storylines that come from our research, and to experience in a safe environment decision-making and failure around protection and to try again. And games let us iterate this. And we're building on a Nigeria-focused game from Civic, which you can see an image of up here, and another game called Ceasefire, which serves as a prototype for Beyond. I've just put the QR code here. We won't discuss it today, but if you want to catch that with your phones, you can play the Ceasefire game at home. It's free and available online. And just to say, we wanted to make a 2D video game, partly because we want to have that international accessibility of people being able to play remotely and far away from, say, Glasgow, where I am, but also training people's brains in empathy, problem solving, appropriate responses, and planning. And that's really a high-level bird's eye view. I'm going to pass to Daisy, who's going to take you behind the scenes and tell you more about serious gaming. Over to you, Daisy.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the how of this game and how we can really communicate the rigor of the game design in the final product. So, as Rebecca said, making a game, it's perhaps not the first thing that people think of when we're talking about serious topics like conflict zones. but the evidence shows that immersing people in a kind of in a player role within a playful context, it's far from trivial, and it really helps people to have that experience-based learning approach to the topic. So there's lots of different words for this. We can call it experience-based learning, game-based learning, serious games, or games for good. But essentially, the evidence shows that this is a more effective way of engaging people with the topic. So next slide, please, Rebecca. So I'm going to talk about the design process. Now, what's very important to start with here is that the three people you see on this call are not the only people who were involved in the design. We had experts, we had academic experts from universities in a number of different countries. We have policy experts from the UK. We have Rebecca, we have Mark, we have the people on the ground who wouldn't necessarily call themselves academic experts in the topic, but they have the lived experience and they have the direct connection with the communities actually doing this peace building work. And then we have myself, I'm a game-based learning designer, and we had our developer team who are called Education Evolved, and we had our graphic designer, Sarah Ahmad. So all of these people come together. Next slide, please, Rebecca. All of these people come together with different sorts of expertise. And what's really important to understand is that if you're an expert peace builder, but not an expert game designer, you can't design that game. And I'm an expert game designer, but I'm not an expert peace builder. So I also can't design that game. So we needed to bring all of this expertise together in the center of this diagram here, which is a diagram showing triadic game design. And really all the triadic part means is that we have experts in game building, we have experts in game design and pedagogy, and we have experts who are peace builders and humanitarian experts, law experts. So all of these people are brought together through the co-design process. Next slide, please. So this is just a very quick overview of the process. And first of all, you have to define the problem that you want to solve. And this became the purpose for the game, the key change that our game wants to make in the world. And that was developed through all of these different types of expertise coming together. So we defined a change that we want to make. We came up with the 5 learning outcomes that Rebecca showed earlier. So 5 specific learning outcomes that the game is designed to teach. And then we designed game mechanics that are going to deliver those outcomes. So the game design comes from the learning outcomes. Next slide, please. We did this through 3 main co-design sprints. So this is the first one in Nairobi in Kenya. Next, please. And for every workshop, we captured this. Obviously, you're not supposed to be able to see the detail here, but we took very detailed notes in each of the 3 workshops that I'm about to show. And this is what we use to help us come to a purpose for the game and learning outcomes for the game that met the needs not only of our Nairobi workshop, but of all of the communities that we were engaging with. Next, please. And our graphic designer captured these themes in the way that you can see on your screen now. So she was able to kind of use the documentation and pull out the key themes, and we have these very nice, kind of easy to read versions of the issues that were discussed during the workshop. Next, please. So again, I don't have time to go into all of these in a lot of detail, but you can get them from us later on if you want to look at them in more detail. Next, please, Rebecca. So we did a second sprint in Amman. And again, this was a hybrid, like the first workshop, this was a hybrid event. So we had people in the room, round tables, working with the tools, the co-design tools that the game involved. And we also had people like myself joining online to help answer questions and to guide that process. Next, please, Rebecca. And here's just a glimpse at a couple more of our captures of the themes around the purpose of the game. Next. And you're beginning to see on this slide the idea of coming to a situation, a world for the game to exist in, focusing on this idea of the issues around a checkpoint. Next, please. And then the third co-design sprint was completely online. And this one focused really on bringing together the knowledge, the embedded knowledge that we'd captured in the first two, and really coming to a final game design that brought in all of these themes. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, so I'm just going to talk quite briefly about the main strategies for the main learning outcomes and the strategies that we chose to take forward into the build of the game. So this is a technique called learning mechanics and game mechanics mapping, which is one of the theories that's used in game design for serious purposes, should I say. So we mapped out the blue cards that you see in front of you are the main learning things that we wanted the game to deliver. And through analysis of those learning mechanics, we came to 4 main game mechanics, which are role play. So we're going to put the player in the persona of somebody in the game. This gives them an emotional and a kind of problem-solving connection to the characters of the game. We also needed the game to deliver information that perhaps the player doesn't know, because it does bring all these different types of knowledge together. So there are snippets of information that are delivered throughout the game to help the players build on what they already know and also learn more. We also have a series of scenarios where the characters within the game are put in a situation. The player responds to that situation, and then the player sees the result of their response. So this kind of idea of simulating a realistic scenario that is applicable to all of the conflict zones that we discussed in the co-design workshop. And then finally, this idea of quick feedback. So the player understands immediately what the result of their choice is and can kind of iteratively build their understanding of these very complex and precarious situations. So those are our 4 key game mechanics. Next slide, please. And with that, I think it's Marc's turn. So I will pass over to Marc for the snippet of the game demo.
Thank you so much, Daisy and Rebecca as well. Thanks for the chance to be here and present a bit on how this game will actually look in more concrete terms. We heard about the research, we heard about the different processes to get actually to a bit more of a specific idea of how to create realistic scenarios that the player, that the audience, the trainees can hopefully identify with, and then really get to the learning outcomes. Next slide, please. So here you see, so where have we landed, right? So we want to, of course, sensitize players, trainees about child protection harms and needs linked to urban warfare, linked to fighting and conduct of hostilities in urban settings. We have the legal and non-legal arguments we try to convey throughout the game and that immersive environment that you have with serious gaming. And then, of course, we want to feature also different legal aspects, as well as also gender protection aspects that we think are important to not forget in urban warfare. So having said all that, of course, this is a 2D game. We can't expect players to spend hours and hours maybe in using this training tool. So where do we prioritize? What do we choose in terms of actual themes that the game should feature? So we have here a couple of ones that came out of the different design workshops. So, for example, it's a common situation that civilians in a war zone might be asked by military or other armed groups to give up their homes, to actually have their homes seized for military purposes. And what does that mean in terms of urban warfare and protection risks? How about effects from urban war fighting that are maybe less visible immediately, but that are still affecting the populations, like in this case, the small family that will feature in the game. So the impact of heavy weapons in urban warfare, in urban spaces where all the infrastructure is connected, should come out as well. A big another protection issue is the access to documents that you might need to maybe displace, to maybe get access to essential services, to water and food. What about the children here that we focus on in terms of their risk of being recruited, maybe as a result of the conflict? How about gender-based violence for the children, but also for the mother, who is the main character of the game here? Indeed, as Daisy said, we try to create this immersive environment where the player can actually put him or herself in the shoes of a mother with two young children. So this is the main character of the game in the first playthrough, and I'll explain how that continues now. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we came down to the decision to focus the character of the game in the first playthrough as being a mother with two smaller children, a boy around 13 to 14 years old and a girl around 8 to 9 years old, who are trapped in that urban warfare setting I talked about. And the idea is that they need to constantly weigh different suboptimal options at different decision points to stay as safe as possible. We will have a total of 8 decision junctions that will cover the different risks I mentioned before. And those risks comes out of the research where we really try to look at where are the most commonly shared issues across different urban warfare settings, whether it's from Ukraine to Colombia, to Syria, to Somalia. And the idea is really to then prompt the player to decide, coming to different decision junctions, what will be the next step? How will the mother, in this case, try to convince an armed actor to change his or her behavior that then will help improve the safety and security of the family? There are different options to choose from, as I said, and by going through those different options, there are certain learnings that we try to convey. Importantly, this is just the first phase of the game. So the mother will really be the main character there, as I said, and we'll focus a lot on what might be moral empathy arguments, what might be strategic arguments that the mother can use that we know from the first-hand research and best practice of what happens. No civilian stays frozen for long when conflict strikes. People become active, they become active agents of protection, they're not just passive victims, and we try to depict the game as such as well. But then, coming back to also the legal learnings we're trying to convey, we'll have a second playthrough of those different protection issues I mentioned. But this time, the player, the trainee, will actually be put in the shoes of a local humanitarian professional. And that humanitarian professional will be engaging on similar protection issues, on similar issues regarding harms and needs, but from a different angle. That is a more legal angle, where we try to also have the trainee learn about international humanitarian law or human rights law or soft non-binding law, like the Explosive Weapons and Populated Area Declaration that many countries have signed up to by now. Next slide, please. So here's kind of an overview. Hopefully you can see it. That kind of illustrates how the game will flow. So as I mentioned, you have that first playthrough at the top with the mother that you are playing as the player, as the user of the game. Going through those different decision junctions, the family home, then an issue about getting your ID documents back. Then there's an issue about access to a playground that is contaminated by unexploded ordnances or mines. Then about a next challenge to get access to food and water, access to education and other essential services like health services. And finally, trying to see if there's a way to escape from the town that the scenario is played in, trying to cross a checkpoint that in this case actually is manned by child soldiers. And that's kind of the flow of the game from left to right by the mother on top here, as you can see. And then you have those related nodes here in green, whereby in the second playthrough, as I mentioned, you are playing that professional humanitarian, maybe from a local CSO, local civil society organization, or local NGO, that will argue to armed actors, but maybe to different higher level armed actors on the same issue. And there, as I said, it will be more legal arguments, slightly more technical arguments maybe that will be used. So the player will have both learnings, putting themselves in the shoes of the mother here, a regular civilian, as well as a professional humanitarian. So we'll try to cover a wider variety of learnings here as we intend coming out from the game design. And at the bottom here, you see a quick snapshot of one of those options. This is about the military armed actors coming to the home of the family. And then what are the different options for the mother here to try and, for example, stay in the home or try to have the soldiers not taking over the home. And then you get to a different decision and a different follow-up decision point after that. Next slide, please. So here it's just taking that first decision point just to give you even a more illustrative, a more specific idea of how this can look like. So put yourself in the shoes of a mother with the 2 small children, and you are in your house, in your home. You're a single mother in this case, and you have soldiers knocking at your door, trying to convince you, or trying to force you rather, to give up your home because the soldiers want to use the home for military purposes. So what are different options here? So we have an option where, for example, the mother just tries to convince the soldiers not to do so, not to proceed with their plan by using empathy arguments, by using moral arguments, by maybe asking the soldiers to think about the impact on the children. And then you might have an option B, where in addition to those moral and empathy arguments, you might also use, as a mother, maybe more strategic arguments, trying to convince the soldiers that by using civilian houses in this case, they might put other civilians at risk as well, not only them as the family, but maybe even their own kind of family. They might really do something that antagonizes the civilian population against them by doing such practices. So it's another additional layer of arguments that we try to also give here as an option. Or there might be a third option where you have empathy arguments, strategic arguments, as well as maybe basic legal arguments about national domestic law, maybe that the mother could infer. Just to say as an example here that there's various options here that we will score in different ways, depending on then the protection outcome, on the outcome of the scene here, whether the family is able to survive, whether the family is able to maybe convince the soldiers not to seize the house. And this is the idea of scoring then those different decision junctions that you go through as a player. Next slide, please. And as I said, you first, as the player, have to complete all those decision junctions as the mother with her 2 children to get familiarized with the different challenges. And then you will play that professional humanitarian. Again, maybe in this case, the humanitarian will not interact with the soldiers on the ground trying to seize the house, for example, but maybe this issue has become a systemic issue, and the humanitarian will be speaking to the local battalion commander in charge of the neighborhood where the mother is playing. So at a higher level, trying to use legal arguments, for example, international humanitarian law here in option 1. Or also trying to appeal to other ways to change the behavior of those higher level military interlocutors. Again, we'll have 3 options here, including an option here, for example, on the right, where maybe the humanitarian will lose his or her composure, maybe trying to threaten the military at higher levels. In this case, probably scoring lower, because we also want to convey the importance and the challenge to of course emotionally interact with military interlocutors in a way that won't diminish the outcome here and the success, trying to keep civilians safer. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'll just very quickly play. It's a very, very initial just idea here to I don't see the play button though. Maybe if you do see, yeah, just to play that, thanks Rebecca, to see on the left, the player can see where he or she is when it comes to the different decision junctions. And then you will have basic dialogue windows appearing, depicting a bit the scenery. Those are just very, very preliminary drawings and scenes. but it's just to depict kind of the two-dimensional game format that we intend to use here. And the way we'll depict the characters in the game, that is still totally in the works. We obviously try to find a way to reflect not only one particular conflict context that we use the research from, but a wider variety. Next slide, please. Yeah, so maybe to provide an initial segue to the subsequent Q&A session, of course, some of the questions that have come up and that are still being discussed are like, how should we gamify harm and need, and how can we gamify very sensitive, very often traumatizing topics in a way that is reflecting reality, is not making light of the topics at hand, at the same time gamifying them for those learning purposes, as Daisy mentioned. How do we depict, how do we illustrate the different characters, both the humanitarian, the mother, the children, as well as the armed actor interlocutors? How do we score, right? Only because somebody has good arguments doesn't mean that the outcome is good, but how do we try to reflect this in the scoring? So I leave you with those sections at this stage, and hand over back to Rebecca to get us into the Q&A section.
Okay, great. So thanks very much. Excellent timekeeping, Daisy and Mark. Well done. So first question was, is there any concern from yourselves about normalizing violent conflict existing as part of human life, even if you mentioned it isn't received as trivial, through teaching people how to deal with these scenarios through a game? I'm just wondering, as this normalizing was often a worry for war games that young people are exposed to, has there been any concern from peer reviewers about this? Okay, and I'll just see if there's a follow-up. So Zoe's follow-up was, thanks for the talk. I'd be keen to try out these sort of peace building games, how to sign up somewhere to test in the future. Okay, Zoe, let me take your smaller, more technical question first. For people who are interested, we will, I think the simplest thing is for you to get in touch with the Beyond Compliance Consortium, and we can post in the chat the main contact there. And what we can do is when the game is ready to be played, we will make it available for play testing. And we will put anonymous online surveys out that you can fill in as a playtester to give us feedback on how you enjoyed it, if you had any issues, any technical or other concerns. But in the meantime, you're also welcome to play Ceasefire. I can put the link to that in the chat, and we are still accepting playtesting surveys on that. And so we're really interested to hear how people experience Ceasefire, because it is a prototype for the Beyond game. And so once someone else is speaking in the Q&A, I can go drop those links into the chat. So I'll put the BCC and Ceasefire. Now, I want to take this first question. I think it's really important, and we might all have contributions to make on this. If I can make a start, and then I'll open it up to Daisy and Mark. So first of all, I would say that if we zoom out to think about this question, there's a much longer series of debates and, scholarly debates as well about wargaming and depictions of violence. And I've been interested in this personally. I was just at King's Wargaming Week recently in London, interacting with wargamers and people designing war games. And what I've learned so far is that there are many different competing views on what's appropriate. And on this almost philosophical question of what do we do in the minds and imaginations of players when we depict a scenario as normal, as acceptable, as realistic, and in a non-trivial way deal with human lives. And so the way I see it, and I would open this to Daisy and Mark as well, is that we are accepting some level of risk by venturing into the gaming format to talk about war and armed conflict. So that's innate, because as soon as you try to say, this is a war-torn city, this is an experience of violence, this is how a family navigates it, you're making a series of decisions that have consequences. And so our approach, because in our consortium, we're skilled with trauma-sensitive approaches to research and field research, and also the effort to decolonize research and have it not be something produced in the North that's disseminated to the global South, so to speak. I think we can bring a lot of those insights from research ethics that we do in our interviewing and our observations and our surveys and so on. And that's actually a value add that's somewhat unique in the gaming space that we're trying to bring in to the building of a game. And so that's an experimental aspect, I think, of the Beyond game. And that's where the co-design becomes so important. But when we talk about young people's exposure, I think that's a separate question where conversations to be had are what age of people should be playing this game? And if we say that it's mainly for adults, then what does it mean to create a game about children that you don't expect children to play, right? And those are live ethical questions that we need to grapple with that seem important to me. So maybe I'll pass it to Mark and Daisy. Do you want to engage with Zoe's question? Because I imagine it's something others might be wondering about as well. And Ioana is also welcome to jump back in as our PI as well. So anyone, please go ahead and just unmute.
Okay, go ahead,
you go,
Daisy.
Mark.
Okay, just quickly from my side, also beyond the research of the Beyond Compliance Consortium, Civic, the Center for Civilians in Conflict, we work in different conflict zones on the ground, also very closely with civilians, directly affected communities who themselves really are keen to further strengthen what they do to try to survive, and that can include the engagement of armed actors that they meet, that they have on the ground. They don't have a choice oftentimes to engage with the armed actors because those armed actors directly influence their lives. They have the power to determine whether somebody is able to maybe displace, to flee, to stay alive at the end of the day. So having a tool that complements different best practices from their own context, from other contexts, and thus helps them to further support, to further strengthen what they are trying to do, what they have to do, because they are living in those realities, is something I think that is appreciated, that we see on the ground, that is highly appreciated when we facilitate, for example, the setting up of what we call community protection groups in different conflict zones, and having a way to be more easily able to maybe to have those reflexes and build those reflexes that the game tries to convey, because it's a gamified training tool, I think is highly appreciated. And maybe Daisy can speak more about the science behind it also. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it's a complementary tool of trying to further strengthen already existing self-protection efforts by civilians in war zones. Over.
Yes, thanks, Mark. So I think I'm just going to talk about games as a format. And what's important to remember is that games are simply a format like documentaries or books or, worksheets that people use for learning. So the format of games is particularly suitable for creating the frame of mind and the mental conditions that place the player into the position of being an active learner. They have to make decisions and they have to solve problems for the game to progress. So our job as serious game designers is to make sure that we create those conditions that are not trivializing these issues, that are accurately representing the situations and the lived experience of the people whose lives we're talking about. So in terms of normalizing, I don't have concerns about that, because unfortunately, this situation is normal for the people who are living in conflict zones. What the game is doing is helping people who are outside of those conflict zones or directly interacting with them to understand the nuance and the complexity of those situations. And I guess I would just add that games as a format have a really unique characteristic, which is that they can actually enable future research by looking at what's called game analytics. You can look at what choices people made. And if you capture those and you analyze them, you can then figure out, oh, hang on, the majority of our players don't understand this aspect. So that's something that the consortium or other people who are involved in teaching peace studies and peace building efforts, they can actually use this raw data to focus their efforts in a really fruitful way using the data that the game produces. And I'll just close so we can move on by saying that there's something also unique about gaming, which is that the player expects to be able to win. And if you put the player in an uncomfortable position of having these non-optimal choices that Marc talked about, there is no easy win in peace games the way that there might be in a war game. And it allows the players to really embrace this transformative reflection in their experience. It's like you only have a series of choices, and some of them, none of them are easy wins. So I think that format of gaming is particularly appropriate for the situation that we're dealing with here, because of that expectation of easy wins, and to undermine that to create critical responses. I'll finish there and pass back to you, Rebecca.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you, Daisy. And I'll just I'll pick up a few more questions here. So briefly, I think there's one I can address to Rana. Hi, welcome. And you're asking, is there context? Yes, so this is important. We overlooked explaining this. So you asked, is there a context to these characters, like a country or a time based on which the decisions and situations were designed? So one thing I should explain is that we made the decision early on that the game would not be about a particular country, but it's supposed to be a fictional setting that's realistic in the sense that it draws on our actual research findings, for example, in Yemen and Syria, Myanmar, and so on. And in order to gather the findings from those research sites, that was why we located the co-design events in Nairobi. So when we were in Nairobi, we were inviting colleagues based in Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, the surrounding area, to feed into, we asked them, what have you seen with children in urban warfare? What have you seen in terms of the gender dimensions? If you're not in an urban warfare context, what have you seen about certain kinds of weapons and how families deal with the threats? What about, for example, negotiations with non-state armed groups, which might happen in any setting? And so we did that in Nairobi, and in Amman, in Jordan, we invited our colleagues who are working in and on, especially Syria and Yemen, and also Afghanistan, to tell us what they were seeing. And it gave us a regional comparative perspective that was something complementary to our existing research, but also different because we were holding the conversations with the aim of orienting towards learning mechanisms and game mechanics, which is a very different way to engage people. And I found this really interesting from a co-design perspective because I saw people who I'd seen before give like an academic research presentation on the same material. And I saw them come alive in a totally different way now that we were inviting them to build stories and narratives and think of storylines. And it was, for example, colleagues from Yemen who had said, what if the journey begins in a home and they have to get to school and they have to get identity documents along the way and there's a checkpoint, and so we kept building and building what we were hearing from different places. But we were very intentional in not making this a game about, say, Yemen or the Congo, because we wanted people to not bring the bias they might bring about who's a bad actor, who's a good actor, and what should happen. So we didn't want that. We didn't want people to say, "Oh, I think this is Gaza. I think this is Ukraine." Right. And what we were following here was this prototype ceasefire that I mentioned. That one takes the idea to a real extreme. It's fictional and also not realistic. It has blobs who are not human. And so they change shape according to their emotions. But conveniently, they also have agreed to follow the Geneva Conventions so that we can teach humanitarian law through them. For this game, because of our stakeholders and our engagement with the Foreign Office and the UK government, we thought, let's make it more realistic because this is going to go directly into training programs. And so, Daisy, Marc, is there anything else you want to say on that question from Rana, or do you want me to jump to the next one?
Maybe just quickly to add, obviously looking at the 9 very different conflict contexts that are fueling the research and that we try to then look at for the game as well, we might have instances for sure where maybe we have, for example, the mother, theoretically at least speaking, let's say, make an argument appealing maybe to the religious norms that could sway an armed actor, and maybe that kind of religious argumentation would not fly, would not be applicable to a context, let's say, like Ukraine. So obviously, we're trying to use a lot of commonalities across those different conflict contexts that the research is looking at. But not everything will be applicable for every context. But the idea is, of course, for the player, for the trainee, to be able to generalize, to extrapolate from those specific decision nodes that we have in the game, and then contextualize them for their context.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. And I've just typed an answer to a question about whether the game builds occupation into it. It does not explicitly. It definitely could have. You could have built this same game with an occupation setting, and we chose not to do that. And for international humanitarian law purposes, what's interesting is our game is much more like a non-international armed conflict. So the laws relating to what we call NIACs in IHL speak are in play. And that's part of the teaching goals and engaging non-state armed groups. But it would be a completely valid decision to build an urban warfare game with an occupation. You could do that as well. Let me jump in. Someone asked about, Ben has asked us if we've built impact assessment into. Yes. And so we have an impact, a log frame, an impact framework for the entire consortium's work. So it spans all of our areas, and we have different types of impact. So we have capacity building or capacity bridging impact, where we're hoping to improve the skills, awareness, knowledge of different stakeholders so they can be more effective in, for example, protecting civilians. We also have instrumental and more conceptual impact, and those each have their own contributions to make. And so the game comes in, it could really be across all of these areas, but it's especially a capacity building tool. And we think of it as a training tool. And indeed, we could have run this whole event and much of our work and said it's a training tool. That would be a different way to communicate its value. And we're working now on exactly how we're going to measure and track evidence of its impact. The analytics will be important so we can track player decision making in the game. We'll also want to be looking at who's playing it and where. And this might include, for example, going beyond humanitarian protection actors in an NGO, for example, to also potentially engaging security forces and weapons bearers and trying to influence perceptions in that way. And so we'll be building quite a robust framework for tracking that. And we've tested some of these ideas through Ceasefire, the prototype. I see Ben has a separate question, so let me pick it up. And Daisy, it's probably for you. So Ben's asking, Daisy was talking about how games do not in and of themselves trivialize their subject matter. I completely agree. Still, games also require simplification to make them approachable and playable. Could you possibly discuss some of the decisions you made about this simplification, playability / realism authenticity dichotomy in the game? Over to you, Daisy. That's a great question. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So I'll answer as concisely as I can. I think as part of the co-design and the theme boards that I quickly flicked through in the presentation, we managed to identify some key themes that were appropriate to all of the varied conflict zones and communities that we worked with as co-design. So step one of getting this into a manageable, playable format was finding those common themes that were not too specific to any one conflict. The second point there is you're absolutely right. Games, by their nature, any capturing of a very complex, nuanced topic requires simplification. So I'm going to just talk about the wider context in which the game sits. So serious games almost always are designed to sit in the wider learning context. And this one is no exception. So we have what's called in-game actions and out-of-game actions. And our in-game actions, like the decision the mother makes about the playground, for instance, you may choose one particular option. but those options are designed, and the dialogue is designed to imply the complexity. And then in those various learning contexts that the game is deployed in, you would have a discussion, a debrief afterwards, or people playing as a group, and the nuance and the complexity would all come out in those out of game interactions. So the purpose of the game here is to sort of give you one possible scenario, but very heavily imply the wider complexity, and to let the specific groups deploying the game pick up on the aspects of that are relevant to them. That's as concise as I can be, but thanks for the question, Ben.
Thanks, Daisy. That's great. Mark, do you want to add anything to that, or do you feel good?
Maybe a quick one to the previous question still. Of course, trying to measure then any behavioral change from the game for the trainees is a constant challenge, no matter who the training audience is, right? Obviously, there's ways to create certain quizzes, whether it's basic Likert scale quizzes or longer quizzes that we, for example, used for the civic game. But it's really then how to have different control groups and really get to proven behavioral change as a result of the gaming experience per se. I think we're still looking at that, but it's a very valid question and not an easy one to always answer.
Yeah, and we welcome your ideas too if you want to email us. We love hearing from other people who are grappling with these questions of how do we know games have an impact? How do we track it? And we'd love to learn from other educators who have found ways to do this. And speaking of someone, so we have our final question, I think we'll go to Imre. So Imre has also designed, Imre Shatner-Ornan has also designed 2, at least, maybe more humanitarian peacekeeping games. And I had a chance to play some of them at King's Wargaming Week. And Imre, thanks for joining us. So you've said, this is a really good point. Let's end with this question. So humanitarian situations, especially protection of civilians and respect for humanitarian law, can be very frustrating and even disappointing. How does the game ensure that participants remain motivated and hopeful about the impact of IHL and humanitarianism without being misled? I love this question, Imre, and I know it's coming from your experience designing. Great, thanks, Ben. Email us. Great. So Imre, let me just start that. I'll pass it to Daisy and Mark to finish. So this is a big challenge I didn't realize would arise, and it happened with Ceasefire, and it's happening with Beyond. It has to. The question is, can you give people a realistic sense of the challenges of implementing international humanitarian law and dealing with setbacks and disappointments without getting them so frustrated that they actually are alienated and disengage? Because that would be the risk. The risk would be, let's go full realism and let's even allow a little bit of maybe cynicism, to creep in, which is how a lot of people are feeling about IHL and humanitarianism these days. If we were to push that fully to its conclusion, I think the result would be player disengagement. But if you present a rosy picture that has nothing to do with the lived reality of war and with the challenges that, for example, as Mark mentioned, a humanitarian aid worker might face negotiating with an armed group, if you don't capture some of that, it's actually potentially dangerous because some of the people playing our game are doing so in a training setting, and they're going to go out and maybe implement some of these ideas and get a very different response. Right. And so the question is, where is the balance that you can keep people interested and engaged, give them a flavor of what is real? And we are grappling with this. This is like a live issue. Mark and Daisy, final word on this.
I mean, give them a flavor of what is real. I hope really comes out, especially in that first playthrough when you play the mother, whose arguments, whose efforts are actually not very legalistic and not directly at a first effort mentioning international law, but the practicalities and the real scenarios, the real underlying issues come out very, very, very real life from that civilian perspective here. And then in that second playthrough, when you play the humanitarian, when you try to employ legal arguments, you see that connection of the law, as bad as it is respected these days and with all the challenges, but how they link up to those everyday lived realities of civilians like the mother. And I would have at least the hope that by having that sequence, maybe there's a bit of a realization how important the laws actually is, even as flawed as they might be, and as some people would say outdated they sometimes are, because they always track the latest developments in warfare.
And I know we're out of time, so I'm just going to very quickly say that games function as safe spaces in order to discover things, and it's better that this realization of the limitations of our context, it's better that that's realized in a training scenario before, as Rebecca said, before people go into real life peace building efforts.
Thank you, Daisy. And unless there are any final words from York, I'll just thank everyone for attending. On our behalf, we'd love to continue the conversation. I think we've shared the link to the Beyond Compliance Consortium, or you can look us up individually through our institutions. And thanks everyone for making time to join us today.